Was there any consequences for the person who molested you when you were a child?
No.
They were never, prosecuted or caught or anything?
No, it was like 30 years later when I even had started having the recollections of the occurrences.
Oh, wow. So those memories were all repressed?
They were all repressed.
Wow.
Yeah. So part of my diagnosis is like dissociative fugue. And so like I experience losses of time. Sometimes people are erased from my memory. And sometimes I'll meet them again and they'll be like, hey, how's it been going? Like, who? Oh, and they'll mention like somebody who we all hung out with and something that we all did together. And then they'll start to kind of come into focus. And it's not necessarily been that person was traumatic, but maybe something connected to something connected to something connected to that person, like resonated.
Cognitive dissociation.
Mm-hmm. And so dissociative amnesia, dissociative fugue, are things that, to this day I deal with. I will have like conversations disappear, and then sometimes false memories will subsume into their place, so that there's like some kind of filler. And sometimes it takes some going back and forth with the person who is in those memories in order to like realize that no, your brain just made that shit up,
I had another podcast guest who also has similar experiences through his own traumas, particularly through his suicide attempt.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's like any spiritual significance to disassociation? Are you a very spiritual person?
I consider myself to be, yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is, again,
I mean, it's
we're
both,
talking
for sure, yeah.
It's both, but I mean, I think that's
it could be
what we all three, mind, body, spirit. It's all very much one enmeshed thing, and it's hard to, not even possible really, to differentiate all of them in all cases. But I do think that, and maybe that's now in my training from a Jungian point of view, I have this lens and this language to talk about these things.
Yeah.
And when we look at things that we would call neuroses or problems, let's say, one of the first questions we ask is, well, what was your soul in need of? What was your soul searching for that it did that? What did your spirit require, rather than why is something wrong with you? Because it's not. It's we are very well functioning machines, and these machines can survive under extreme loads of stress, but they must reconfigure in order to do so. And so I had to reconfigure my memories, had to reconfigure my whole reality, had to reconfigure in order for me to be able to move forward. And I think just from that young age, dealing with all of that, it was just too much. But then also not being able to learn about it or deal with it or learn to deal with it over those years, it stayed too much for a very long time, until I got into that relationship where it was really confrontational. But I really wanted to be in that relationship. And then I also really didn't want to be in that relationship. So there's the internal confrontation in the relationship. But it was also my longest relationship. Regardless of the off and on and the back and forth. And I think that was one of the greatest aspects of my healing, or at least the jump point, because I was in it, I was working it. And that's what I really needed, to then start building the strength and the both the physical and spiritual and the ego strength to sit there and understand these things that were too difficult for a child to learn. Later on, I met this woman, and we, talked for a little bit, and it didn't quite work out. And then later on, because this was like kind of right after, she was like, yeah, it felt like you were emotionally stunted. And she's like, I shouldn't have said that. That was a really horrible judgmental thing to say. And I was like, no, that was accurate as fuck. Because that early trauma made my psyche make sure to avoid all kinds of confrontation. I've always been a great mediator. I've always been the person who makes sure to take care of things, make sure that everybody's okay, so that nobody's flaring up, nobody's going crazy. And it's become a skill. And I realize now, looking back, that it's because there are all these things that I couldn't handle, and that through not growing through a process of learning how to handle these things, it was just total avoidance of these things for 30 years.
So what I was trying to get at with the whole spiritual thing was just wondering where your disassociation, where these episodes come from. There's it's kind of like, reminds me of like the nature and nurture, nature versus nurture argument. Like, do you think it's in part just of all the trauma, all the difficulties you had growing up, or is there something deeper? Which it sounds like you're already in touch with, and you're already familiar with, and you've done a lot of exploring and investigation on your own. But it just reminds me of like a session that I had with my therapist, where when I first started getting into my spirituality, and I started to see this ancestral trauma that I have within me, and all the reasons why I had depression growing up, because I was never abused, I was never mistreated, I was never had any trauma, but I had this like overwhelming depression. I never had any idea of where it came from. And what was interesting, one thing that she said that I found was interesting was she asked me, like, why do you need to know why? Like, because some people will go through life just treating what they already have. And then I think there's others like myself and you, it sounds like you as well, who have a desire for like some serious, extreme self-examination to get to the bottom of it. And I feel like that's necessary to really, at least in my own experience, to really understand oneself and to heal without the use of medication or something, instead of treating the symptoms, like really getting down to the source, which is much harder for sure. But do you agree, or like, what has your experience been like?
I've always thought that that root cause analysis, basically, talking in IT terms, is necessary to be able to really solve the problem, and then understanding that empiricism is not the be all and end all. So just because you see things and you hear a phenomenon doesn't necessarily mean that that's the actual root cause. And so to really be open to the different layers of reality, the different aspects of the body, both the physical body and the subtle body, and the way that energy flows. I think it's extremely important to be open and understanding that all of these things exist in this like Venn diagram type overlap. And I think maybe like sitting back into, I guess, a more spiritual, maybe even less cause and effect like way of looking at it. I think that it's like if you look at maybe the Vedic understanding of reality, that we are in this common existence where we are basically all one and connected, but the way that we see ourselves and see each other is through this illusion, this Maya, and that is also how we interface with one another. That's also like where the canvas upon which we paint our personas, and the canvas upon which our feelings are drawn, and that we get to identify with those, or we get to, like you said earlier, watch them and not identify with them. But that choice is something that we have to make, but we can only make that once we realize that Maya is Maya. But Maya is not just there to be a pain in the ass. It's how we interact. It's how we associate. It's part of what allows us to be connected. And that connection is is necessary to who we are as human animals. And so I think that Maya was doing its job, and it was able to present what needed to be presented and hide what needed to be hidden, to allow me to, like, because if I had really had to bear all that at that age, I may have been even more isolated, like more so than just the circumstances. Because when I was around people, then I was with people. It's just I didn't have the option to be around people a lot of the time. And so I was in myself. But when I got around people, you know, my mom would take me to parties, to jazz clubs, to like late night stuff all the time, because this is what she was doing at that age. And anything that she could go to, there was the restriction of, well, I've got this kid I've got to watch. So if she could, she would just bring me along. And I was there, very gregarious, very like personable, very adult as a young child. So I think that ability to interact with people and to interface and have that connection was facilitated by Maya, by the taking away of these realities that I was not able to deal with or able to process, maybe for longer than was helpful at the time. But I think it was necessary when it was necessary.